The year is 1863. A Union general is asleep in his bed, 25 miles behind his own lines, surrounded by thousands of his own soldiers. By morning, he'll wake up a prisoner. His captor won't use an army. He'll use 29 men, a rainstorm, and a whispered password. Fast forward 81 years. American soldiers at a Belgian crossroads are interrogating every passing jeep. They're asking who Mickey Mouse's girlfriend is. They're asking where Chicago is located. Get it wrong and you're arrested, sometimes shot. Because German commandos are driving American vehicles, speaking perfect English, wearing American uniforms. No one knows who's real anymore. 2 men, 2 wars, 1 terrifying lesson. You don't need to defeat an army. You just need to make them defeat themselves. March 9th, 1863. The midnight air in Fairfax Courthouse, Virginia, was thick with bone-chilling mist that swallowed what little light remained from dying lanterns in the Union camp. To the thousands of Federal soldiers stationed there, they were safe. Deep within their own lines, miles from any organized Confederate force, protected by pickets and sentries. No enemy could penetrate their defenses without a massive, bloody assault. They were wrong. Through the fog, 29 men on horseback moved like shadows, their hooves muffled by burlap sacks and the silence of predators. At the head of this small band rode a man who didn't look like a warrior at all. John Singleton Mosby was never supposed to be a killer. At 5'7" and barely 125 pounds, the Virginia lawyer looked more like a clerk than a cavalryman. He was a man of books and legal briefs, a slight figure with a sharp mind and a tongue that had landed him in more trouble than his fists ever could. When the Civil War erupted in 1861, Mosby didn't rush to enlist. He watched. He studied. He saw Union armies burn Virginia farms, hang suspected spies without trials, and terrorize civilians whose only crime was geography. This wasn't abstract politics to Mosby. This was personal. They were turning his homeland into a graveyard. And by January 1863, standing amidst the wreckage of his home state, he had a radical idea that would rewrite the rules of combat. He didn't see war as grand, sweeping maneuvers or glorious charges across open fields. He saw it as psychological warfare. What if you didn't need an army to win? What if 9 men in the right place could do more damage than 900 in the wrong one? Mosby's philosophy was born from cold necessity. He was small, frail-looking, appeared as if a stiff wind could knock him over, but he had something the massive lumbering Union armies didn't: intimate knowledge of Northern Virginia. Every cave, every farm, every back road. He understood a fundamental truth that would echo through warfare for the next century. An army that controls the ground controls nothing if it doesn't control the night. He approached the legendary cavalry commander J.E.B. Stuart with a proposal. Give me a handful of men and let me operate independently behind enemy lines. Stuart agreed, probably assuming the small lawyer wouldn't survive a month. Mosby started with 9 men. He didn't want glory seekers or medal hunters. He wanted men who could ride, shoot, and most importantly, disappear. They became the 43rd Battalion Virginia Cavalry, Mosby Rangers. The region they operated in, Loudoun and Fauquier counties in northern Virginia, became known in whispered, fearful tones as Mosby's Confederacy. His tactics were simple and terrifying. His men never slept in camps. They stayed in local homes, blending into the civilian population like ghosts. To a Union patrol, every farmer became a potential scout, every stable hand a potential assassin. The Federals weren't fighting a battalion. They were fighting a shadow that could be behind any door, inside any barn, waiting in any tree line. His first raids were surgical strikes designed to build a legend. Strike a picket line at 2 in the morning, burn 3 supply wagons, vanish before dawn, hidden in a farmer's attic or a limestone cave. The Union response was predictable and exactly what Mosby wanted: paranoia. They pulled soldiers from front lines to guard supply routes. They fortified camps that should have been safe. They jumped at shadows, because sometimes the shadows jumped back. But tonight, March 9, 1863, Mosby was attempting something that would cement his reputation forever. The 29 Rangers reached the first Union picket post. A lone soldier stood by a small fire, rubbing his hands together against the cold. He didn't even have time to shout. A shadow detached from the trees, a hand clamped over his mouth, cold steel pressed against his throat. Mosby's voice was barely a hiss, the password. The soldier, trembling, whispered it: "Victory." Mosby smiled without warmth. Indeed. They rode into Fairfax Courthouse using that password, moving right past guards who assumed they were a returning patrol. The town was a graveyard of sleepers. Mosby led his men directly to a specific house, the headquarters of Brigadier General Edwin Stoughton. The windows were dark. Mosby dismounted, walked up the steps like a dinner guest, and knocked with the butt of his pistol. A young lieutenant, half-dressed and confused, opened the door. "Is the general in?" Mosby asked, his voice casual, almost friendly. "He is, but he's asleep. Who are you?" Mosby stepped into the hallway, boots tracking mud onto expensive rugs. He didn't answer. He grabbed the officer by the collar, shoved him toward one of his rangers. "Take him to the horses. I'll wake the general myself." Mosby climbed the stairs, found the bedroom at the end of the hall. Inside, General Stoughton was buried under blankets, snoring with the heavy rhythm of a man who believed himself untouchable. Mosby didn't hesitate. He grabbed the general's nightshirt, hauled him upright, and delivered a sharp, stinging slap across his face. Stoughton bolted awake, gasping for air. "What is this? Who are you? Do you know who I am?" Mosby leaned in close, his eyes reflecting nothing but cold intent. "General, did you ever hear of Mosby?" "Yes," Stoughton whispered, color draining from his face. "Have you caught him?" "No," Mosby replied. "He has caught you." They walked the general, still in his pajamas and barefoot, through his own camp. Thousands of Union soldiers slept within 100 yards. One shout, and Mosby's 29 men would be slaughtered. But the silence held. They mounted their horses, threw the general behind a rider, and melted back into the fog. By the time Union bugles sounded at dawn, the gray ghost was 5 miles away, disappearing into the Bull Run Mountains. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a psychological decapitation. When news reached President Abraham Lincoln, he didn't mourn the general. He joked that he could make another general in 5 minutes, but he couldn't replace the 58 horses Mosby had also stolen. Behind the joke, though, the Union High Command was paralyzed. If a general could be pulled from his bed in the middle of his own camp, who was safe? Mosby's raids grew more audacious. In September 1864, he struck the Berryville wagon train, a massive supply convoy carrying the lifeblood of General Sheridan's army. In a midnight assault, Mosby's men used 2 small mountain howitzers to shatter the lead wagons, creating a wall of fire that trapped panicked teamsters. In the chaos of burning wood and screaming horses, the Rangers destroyed over $200,000 in supplies, enough to feed an army for months, and vanished before the smoke cleared. Then came the Greenback Raid in October 1864. Mosby's men derailed a train on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, stripping Union paymasters of $173,000 in cash. They didn't just take money, they took the Union's sense of security. No train was safe, No road was secure. The enemy among us was no longer theory, it was suffocating reality. The Union was forced to pull 30,000 soldiers from frontline combat just to guard their own supply lines against 43 Rangers. But the Ghost wasn't immortal. At Miskell Farm, Union cavalry cornered Mosby's men in a barn, surrounding them with superior numbers. It should have been the end. Mosby didn't believe in surrender. He ordered a desperate suicidal charge through Union lines. In a whirlwind of revolving pistol fire and clashing sabers, the Rangers didn't just escape, they routed their attackers. Mosby was shot 7 times over the course of the war. Once he was left for dead in a frozen field, his blood staining white snow as Union soldiers passed by, never realizing the man they hunted was dying at their feet. Each time he came back. By war's end, he'd proven something the military establishment didn't want to admit. You don't need a massive army to cripple one. You just need to make them afraid of their own shadow. But while Mosby terrorized the Union with invisibility, the Union responded with brutality. In September 1864, Federal forces caught 6 of Mosby's Rangers near Front Royal. Under orders from General George Custer's command, they were executed on the spot. One was shot in front of his own mother, another was hanged with a sign pinned to his chest. This is the fate of all Mosby's men.
When news reached Mosby in the caves of the Bull Run Mountains, the Gray Ghost didn't weep, he went cold. He gathered his Union prisoners, men from the same units that had carried out the executions, and forced them to draw lots from a hat, a lottery of death. 7 Union soldiers drew fatal slips. Mosby led them into the woods under freezing rain and had them executed, matching Union cruelty man for man. He sent a courier to Union lines with a letter to General Sheridan. He stated clearly that he had never sought a war of no quarter, but if the Union chose to hang his men, he would hang theirs until the valley ran red. The message was received. The executions stopped. Even in the depths of total war, the Gray Ghost had forced a massive empire to respect the rules of the abyss. 81 years later, another man was studying Mosby's playbook, and he was about to take psychological warfare to a scale the world had never seen. Otto Skorzeny didn't look like a commando. At 6'4", with a jagged dueling scar running down his left cheek, he looked like a villain from a Gothic novel. Born in Vienna in 1908, he was a middle-class Austrian engineer who stumbled into the SS not out of fanaticism, but because he was good at solving impossible problems. In 1943, he wasn't famous. He was a staff officer pushing papers. But he possessed a quality Adolf Hitler desperately needed as the Third Reich began to crumble: the ability to execute the impossible. Skorzeny's first moment of fame came in September 1943. Benito Mussolini, Italy's ally to Hitler, had been overthrown and imprisoned in a hotel on top of Gran Sasso, the highest peak in the Apennine Mountains. It was an impossible location, surrounded by sheer cliffs, accessible only by cable car, guarded by 200 Italian soldiers. Every conventional plan said it couldn't be done. Skorzeny looked at the problem and saw opportunity. On September 12, 1943, 12 gliders descended on the mountain in broad daylight. They crash-landed so close to the hotel that guards didn't have time to react. Skorzeny stormed the building with an Italian general he'd brought specifically for intimidation. He found Mussolini in a second-floor room, staring in disbelief. "Duce," Skorzeny said in his rough German accent, "the Führer has sent you to set free." 90 minutes after landing, they were airborne again with Mussolini, not a single shot fired. It was so audacious, so perfectly executed, that even Allied commanders grudgingly admitted brilliance. Hitler promoted Skorzeny on the spot and gave him a new mission: psychological warfare. Which brings us to December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last desperate gamble to split Allied lines and buy time. Skorzeny was given a secret mission within the larger offensive, Operation Greif.
The goal wasn't to capture ground, it was to create chaos, to channel the spirit of John Singleton Mosby across an ocean and 80 years of history. Skorzeny assembled a unit of German soldiers who spoke perfect English, not just functional English, American English. They studied baseball statistics, they memorized movie stars' names, they learned how Americans walked, talked, cursed, complained. Then Skorzeny dressed them in captured American uniforms, gave them American jeeps, American weapons, American identification papers. The mission was elegantly simple: infiltrate behind American lines, spread confusion, make the Americans so paranoid they'd start shooting each other. It worked beyond Skorzeny's wildest expectations. On December 16, 1944, as the Battle of the Bulge erupted across the frozen Ardennes forest, Skorzeny's commandos began slipping through American lines. Some changed road signs at critical crossroads, sending entire divisions into muddy dead ends. Others spread rumors that Allied headquarters had been overrun. A few drove up to American checkpoints, flashed perfect papers, reported fabricated German movements. Within 48 hours, the American rear area descended into total chaos. American soldiers began stopping every vehicle, interrogating every man in uniform. The questions got increasingly bizarre. What's the capital of Illinois? Who won the World Series? What's Mickey Mouse's girlfriend's name? Get it wrong, and you were arrested, sometimes shot on the spot. The problem was, not every American soldier knew the answers either. General Omar Bradley himself was detained at a checkpoint because he said Springfield was the capital of Illinois. The guard, convinced it was Chicago, nearly arrested him. Another colonel was held for hours because he couldn't name the current husband of a famous movie star. A captain was pulled from his jeep at gunpoint because he hesitated when asked about baseball.
Skorzeny's few dozen commandos had created gridlock across hundreds of square miles of Allied rear area. Just like Mosby 80 years earlier, he'd proven the most devastating attack isn't on an enemy's body, it's on their mind. The irony is, Skorzeny's men accomplished almost nothing tactically. They cut a few phone wires, changed some road signs, spread some rumors. The Battle of the Bulge failed for other reasons, but strategically, Operation Greif was a masterpiece. It forced Americans to waste thousands of man-hours, delay crucial troop movements, and lose faith in their own identification systems. American militia police began arresting their own generals. Convoys ground to a halt as MPs interrogated drivers for hours. Entire battalions were delayed because someone thought German infiltrators had cut communications. The paranoia spread like a virus. Every soldier became a suspect. Every accent was analyzed. Every answer was questioned. Skorzeny had turned the greatest military force in the world into a paranoid, self-destructive organism. He'd made them more afraid of each other than they were of the Germans shooting at them from the front. After the war, Skorzeny was tried for war crimes, specifically for his men wearing American uniforms during combat. The charge was that this violated the laws of war. His defense was brutally simple. We never fought while in uniform, we only infiltrated. The moment we engaged in combat, we removed the disguises and wore German uniforms. The prosecution brought witness after witness. Then Skorzeny's defense called a British commando to the stand. Under oath, the British officer admitted the Allies had done exactly the same thing in occupied Europe, dressed as Germans, infiltrated behind lines, caused chaos. The tribunal acquitted Skorzeny. He walked free and became a strange celebrity, the Nazi commando who technically hadn't broken the rules. He lived out his days in Spain, consulting for various governments and intelligence agencies. The man who'd proven that in modern warfare, the uniform didn't matter, only the mind games did. Mosby's ending was even stranger. After the Civil War ended, he realized that for Virginia to survive and rebuild, the fighting had to stop permanently. He did the unthinkable. He became a Republican and a close personal friend of Ulysses S. Grant, the very man who had spent 4 years trying to kill him.
His own people called him a traitor. Former Confederates shot at him in the streets of towns he'd once defended. He lived out his days as a United States diplomat in Hong Kong, and later as a lawyer for the Department of Justice, a ghost in a world that had moved on from horses and revolvers. He died in 1916, at age 82. He outlived the generals who hunted him, the soldiers who hated him, and the cause he'd bled for. Today, at military bases around the world, the tactics of John Singleton Mosby are still taught to elite special forces. The lesson is always the same. You don't need a massive army to win a war. You don't need superior numbers or bigger guns. You need to control one thing, the space inside your enemy's head. Mosby made Union camps into prisons of paranoia, where every farmer was a threat. Skorzeny made American rear areas into labyrinths of suspicion, where every soldier was a potential imposter. Both proved that a handful of men in the right place, doing the right thing, can paralyze an army 1,000 times their size, not by killing, by turning the enemy to kill their own momentum, by turning their strength into weakness, by making them so afraid of shadows they forget to watch for real threats. The Union never caught Mosby. The Americans never stopped Skorzeny's commandos from infiltrating. Both men walked away from their wars alive, legends in their own time, because they'd learned the most important lesson in warfare. You don't need to be the strongest, you just need to make your enemy doubt their own strength. That's the true power of the ghost warrior, not invisibility, the ability to make everyone else see ghosts everywhere they look, to turn an army's size into a liability, to transform confidence into paranoia, to prove that warfare isn't won on battlefields, it's won in the 3 inches of space between a soldier's ears. Mosby did it with 29 men and a midnight fog. Skorzeny did it with a few dozen commandos and American uniforms. Both changed warfare forever, not by inventing new weapons or new tactics, by understanding an ancient truth that armies always forget. The most dangerous enemy is the one you can't see, the one who makes you trust nothing, the one who turns your own camps, your own roads, your own soldiers into potential threats. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how many men you have or how well armed they are. If they're looking over their shoulders at each other instead of forward at the enemy, you've already lost. That's what the Gray Ghost and the most dangerous man in Europe proved. You don't win wars by being bigger, you win by being invisible, by being the knock on the door at midnight, by being the voice at the checkpoint asking who Mickey Mouse's girlfriend is, by being the shadow that makes an entire army afraid of the dark. History isn't just made by the people who win battles, it's made by the ghosts who make the enemy lose their minds.